Okay, guys, we are back with English 250. English 250, Introduction to Literary Studies. I am in a new location. Had a lot of, I haven't done laundry in 10 weeks, and I don't have a laundry machine. I don't have a washing machine dryer in my apartment, but I also don't live in like an apartment building that has one in the basement. And I guess I could go to like a laundromat, but I think you're supposed to be staying away from people. And anyway, my parents have a very small washing machine in their apartment, so I came up to their apartment when because they're not home. And so I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do 18 loads of laundry. So that's what I did. 18 loads of laundry, which is crazy. Um, anyway, so we're continuing on with our art and audiences section. We're kind of reaching the end here. I think that there may only be one more philosopher to do in this section, and then we have a kind of concluding guy, and then we're done for this semester. But this philosopher that we're working on to before I get to that though, there were two other examples I wanted to toss in thinking about Bourdieu. Thinking about the idea that the way that you use art and other things to kind of signal for people sort of what team you're on and what team you're not on. Wearing masks in New York City. I think I see a lot of people. People aren't wearing masks because they're saying to themselves, "Well, I don't need a mask. I'm not sick." But you're not just wearing it for practical reasons. Wearing a mask in New York City during a pandemic is not just it's not just a practical thing. Like if I wear the mask, then my breath won't go far away from my mouth and get people sick, etc. Um, and it's not just about safety. It's about saying to people, I care about what's happening right now. It's a signal to other people. So it's not just the practical effect of here's what the mask does. Wearing a mask in New York City at this time signals to people that you care about your neighbors. Now you might say, well, it doesn't matter if I care or don't care. I'm not sick, so I'm not going to get them sick, so I'm not going to wear a mask. But it's not just about that. It's a signal to people that you care about other people. It's not the practical effects are not the only thing at play here. The other example I had is I was at a party in the American South with some older people, um, and these folks at the party, um, older folks, and this is back when sort of Trump first got elected. They were complaining about the chips and dip. And there were chips and dip, and there was guacamole, and there was hummus, and an older gentleman said, how come nowadays it's all guacamole and hummus? Whatever happened to, French onion dip? I don't see why we need guacamole and hummus. So, and I think to most people in the room, it seemed like he was just complaining about condiments. He wanted to put French onion dip on his chips instead of why is there all this guacamole and hummus? Um, but given that President Trump had said lots of negative things about immigrants from the Middle East and from Mexico specifically, it struck me as significant that what he was really signaling wasn't a dislike of the foods, but a dislike of the people that like the foods. And his complaints about guacamole and hummus felt like coded ways of complaining about Mexicans and people from the Middle East, which of course are the two of the major groups that Trump gets annoyed with. Okay, so I think I'm finished with Bourdieu. I could really spend all semester on Bourdieu, just going crazy with examples all the time. You will notice your own examples in your lives. Um, so as we come to what may be the last philosopher in the art and audience unit, is actually one of the most important ones, and I probably should have put him earlier, but he's so important I didn't quite feel ready to talk about him, so I left him alone for a little while. It's Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud is a complicated guy. I'm a big fan of Sigmund Freud's, but he has a lot of you have to explain why a lot because Freud has some problems. The thing about Freud, so Freud invented sort of psychoanalysis, which was sort of a major part of psychology as a department, as an area of study, human psychology. And Freud had some really radical ideas about human psychology and invented psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis was really like you have he believed you could solve mental problems just by talking about them. It's called talk therapy. Now, modern day psychology involves all kinds of other things, including medicine that you prescribe to people, psychologists, psychotherapists. There's all kinds of different groups, but the Freud's idea was really that like just talking about things could sort of heal mental illness. You just got to get in touch with yourself. The problem. So what Freud did is he brought patients into his room. He had like a medical room or whatever, where patients would lay down on a couch and talked about their problems, and just by saying them out loud, they could be cured. The problem with Freud, and there's a lot of problems with Freud. The main problem with Freud is that Freud um, said he was a scientist, and it was very important to him that other people he very important to him. He's a scientist, he said, and it was very important to him that other people see him as a scientist. The problem with Freud is right there, which is that he's not really a scientist. He said he was, and he wanted other people to think he was, and he certainly had a big effect on psychology, which is a science. Freud's not a scientist. The thing about science, you have one of the definitions of science, it has to be kind of repeatable. If you do an experiment and you get a result, anybody anywhere should be able to do the same experiment and get the same result. That's a key part of science. It's also about gathering data, like large amounts of data. You need to have, you don't do tests on like 30 or 40 people. You do tests on thousands of people. Because sometimes you do a test on like 4 or 5 people and you're like, oh shit, I just discovered something crazy. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the results are valid for everybody everywhere. You got to look around. You got to get a broad swath of people. You got to have a lot of people. So, for example, just a real simple recent example is with COVID. People were saying that it can really damage the lungs. That even if you're healed from it, it could damage the lungs. But it's worth pointing out that, but like it's so early in the process of finding out about COVID, it's unclear. We need to do more data. You don't need to get scared yet. And one of the things is that some of the tests were coming out of China. Well, China has massive air pollution problems. I'm talking like 100 times worse than New York City. China has some of the worst pollution in the world. That kind of thing can damage your lungs since childhood, so that it's unclear if So the point is that you can't just test a handful of people in China and go, this is true all over the world, because in China they have worse air pollution than they do here, much worse. And so the point is, you got to test a large number of people. Freud did not do that. Freud just talked to a relatively small number of people, each of whom had unique cases. He's talking about personal stories. It's not the kind of thing you can repeat the experiment with, because it's just like he was treating each individual as a unique person, and it wasn't really the kind of thing where he was giving medicine to thousands of people and was tracing the effects on them. It's not really science. He wanted it to be science, but it's not science. So for a lot of people, people will tell you Freud's an idiot, that he just made stuff up, and then it's not real and it's garbage. And he's not a scientist. He's not anything. He's just an idiot who said dumb things, and he's not to be trusted. I understand why they say these things, but I really like Freud, and I'll tell you why. Fundamentally, Freud is not a scientist, but it doesn't mean he's nothing. English professors love Freud. I think he fits better in an English department than in a psychology department. And the reason why is that Freud is fundamentally a myth maker. He's a myth maker like Shakespeare came up with all these characters. None of them are real, but they're all interesting, and they can help you. Studying the characters can help you understand your life. Freud invented a lot of ideas. Consciousness, the unconscious, ego, id, superego. The superego is the part of your brain that tells you to be responsible. The id is the part of your brain that tells you to, go party and fuck around. Who cares about rules? You just want to get laid. You want to get drunk. I say part of the brain, but it's not really the brain. It's the mind. The brain is a scientific thing. The mind is a metaphor. And Freud's ideas, they're not scientific. You can't detect the ego, the id, the superego, the unconscious, repression. These are all really good ideas, but you can't find them with a microscope because they're not scientific ideas. They're myths, like the myths in the Bible or in ancient Greek and Roman religion, like the myth of Aphrodite or Persephone or Mars, god of war. Does that mean it's all garbage? Of course not. Myths and stories are really useful for understanding the world that we live in, and that's why I like Freud. He is the most persuasive myth maker since the Bible, because when he makes shit up, people believe it's real and it's true. That's how hard they believe it. And so I think Freud is actually one of the greatest myth makers and storytellers who's ever lived, because his stories are so persuasive, people believe they're 100% real. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video.